Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Torres.
And I'm Hope Gurion.
We are here today to talk through some of our survey responses. So in the fall, we ran our inaugural CDH benchmark survey. That's a mouthful, but we basically asked teams about their discovery habits, trying to understand how different habits impact product success. And one of the questions we asked people was, is your product intended to increase revenue or to reduce costs? The reason why we ask that question is for most companies, especially for-profit companies, they're looking at growing profit. The input to that is increasing revenue and reducing costs. Most products, we can sort of look at which side of the equation are they focused on. What was surprising is a number of people selected other, meaning they didn't think it increased revenue or reduced costs. But then when they selected other, they had to enter what their other was. And so what Hope and I are going to do today is talk through some of those responses because some of them are really fascinating. They definitely show that teams aren't always able to connect the dots between their product outcomes and their business outcomes. So we want to use some of these as examples. All right, Hope, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. So the first one I think is interesting because we've seen it a few times. So somebody wrote in, we're seen as the future of video consumption for a large television channel. Do you want to react to that one about whether that's increased revenue or decreased costs?
A lot of television channels are advertiser supported, in which case driving up viewership or consuming more videos leads to an opportunity to have more ads seen or ads seen by a increasing number of people that can drive up revenue for a company if it's an ad-supported model.
Yeah, I think for most TV channels, in fact, I'm not sure there's any exceptions, you need video consumption to drive whatever your business model is. That's how you are generating revenue, right? Either advertisers are paying to get their brand in front of your viewers, or your viewers are paying a subscription to consume that content. We've seen a couple times now a little twist on this, which is, what if that TV channel is public, like it's owned by a government or it's funded by a government?
Yeah, so when this comes up, typically the way that a company might be trying to drive their viewership, or reason they might be trying to drive that viewership, is to justify continued government funding. So again, there's probably a lot of nuances, government to government and media outlet to media outlet, but typically if there's nobody watching that television network anymore, the odds of it being funded by the government, that's being seen as a good use of government funds, is low. So typically that's the relationship. It may be securing consistent or the same level of government funding, or perhaps increasing viewership might lead to an increase in government funding.
Yeah, so on the sort of for-profit channels, we see, like, if you have a larger audience, you might generate more ad revenue, or if you have a larger audience, you might generate more subscriptions. For that public funded model, maybe it's you have to keep your audience and or grow your audience to secure that government funding. And so I think in both situations, I would argue these teams are on the increased revenue side. All right, let's look at another one. So this one is a little bit interesting. So this person wrote in, they work on a website for content documentation of their company's products. So product documentation, API references, grab and go marketing. Tell me your thoughts on that one.
Well, what I'm hearing in that is that it is either an internal facing team, like given that example of like it's for, I don't know, the sales or marketing team to grab screenshots or feature lists, or I'm not sure what. I'm also thinking that it could be some customer facing documentation, like how-to guides or references, or maybe if there's developers in their customer group and it's developer facing documentation. Again, I don't know exactly. I don't know if there's enough detail. So it either could be an internal team or it could be a customer facing team. But when I hear that level of scope, it usually is around cost avoidance or cost reduction. We want to make our internal teams more efficient, or we want to make our customers more self-sufficient so they don't require as much training or as much support resources. That's typically where my head goes when I hear that's the scope of responsibility of that team.
Yeah, I think this one depends. I could actually argue both sides. So let's say this is customer documentation. If we do a good job and we have really good customer documentation and we built out a knowledge base, maybe we're reducing costs for our support team. And I can clearly show how the better our documentation gets, the fewer support tickets we get. But I also could argue the more we help our customers, the more value they get out of our product, the more they spend with us. So this is one that I actually genuinely understand why they wrote other, right? Because it might be a little bit of both. And I would be really curious to see how this team is setting outcomes for that company.
Right.
Is it more important for them to help alleviate support? Or is it more important for them to like supercharge their customers and grow revenue? And what's really interesting is I think it's actually important that this team get clarity on which is which, because how you document, what you tackle in that documentation probably changes, right? If you're trying to reduce support, you might be focusing on things like, I need to reset my password, I can't log in, I don't know where to find things. Whereas if you're focusing on increasing revenue, you might be writing documentation like, here's the best practices for how to do this thing with our product, right? So even though that same team might be on one side or the other, what they pick is going to change how they work.
That's exactly right. And I love that you use that example, because if a team, I sometimes have teams, they're like, it's both, it's everything. It's to grow revenue and it's to reduce costs. I encourage them to challenge that. Okay, so you're saying if we did nothing to improve revenue, but we did effectively reduce the number of support, the ratio of support people to the ratio of customers that we have, would that be enough impact on our business? Or if we did nothing, we kept the exact same number of support tickets and support people for our customers, but we got customers getting more value out of it, utilizing it more, would that be success? And if they can't distinguish, then I think their company hasn't given them enough strategic context and they need to go push their leadership for clarity.
Yeah, we see a lot of like content teams that are focused on growth, right? They're not focused on reducing costs. They're not reducing support tickets. They're increasing number of customers and the effectiveness of those customers and the average spend of those customers. That is solely on the revenue side. We see other content teams that are more focused on reducing support tickets. I think it'd probably be very hard for a team to do both well at the same time. And I think that's the value of an outcome, is it really sets the focus. All right, let's look at another one. We're a public benefit OSS company. We generate value for open source communities by sharing knowledge and solutions.
All right. So when I think about this, I'm hearing that it's a community, like I'm thinking like Wikipedia or some other like, open source where there's lots of contributors. There's usually still a revenue model though. Like there's some way, could be donations, could be there's some premium access subscription, something like that. But it sounds like it's a bit of a marketplace, and I don't know enough about that particular company's context, but I'd want to get clarity on like, where does the money come from? If it's a marketplace where it's like the bigger the community, the richer the best practices, the more likely somebody is to donate, or the more likely somebody is to buy a subscription, then that helps you connect the size of the community to a way that your company makes money. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, we start with this sort of formula for-profit companies of our goal is to grow profit. The inputs to that are increase revenue and decrease costs. I think for nonprofits or not-for-profit organizations, usually that top line outcome is grow impact. And then the inputs to that are we still have to generate revenue. It's just our revenue is donations or development dollars or grant money right? It's still dollars coming in. And then we obviously see in these organizations reducing costs is a much bigger factor because they're often evaluated or graded based on the percentage of their costs as part of their operating budget. What's interesting about this one is we generate value for the open source community by sharing knowledge and solutions. So they're building products or knowledge products for an open source community. I'm going to guess that the more value they offer that community, the more they see donations come in, or the more they see grant money come in because they're serving a population. Okay. And so I can imagine this one is a lot like the previous one we discussed, where if they're focused on making that community more successful and that's increasing donations, then they're on the increased revenue side. If they're focused on creating that knowledge and those solutions to reduce incoming sort of support requests, then they might be on the decreased cost side. Okay, let's look at our next one. This is a mistake I see often. So I'm going to read this one out loud and just let you reply. We are a software consulting company, so we have internal service offerings as well as contributing to both revenue generation and cost reduction for our clients.
Okay, so yes, if you're in a consulting business, typically when you're engaging with a client, they have some sort of business objective. Could be on the revenue side, could be on the cost reduction side. So what I'm hearing in that answer is across our portfolio of clients or portfolio of products that we work on, sometimes it's about driving revenue and sometimes it's about reducing cost depending on our clients' business outcomes that they care about. And so this is why a team might flip-flop if they're serving multiple clients. But we know that most teams make most impact, most progress on their outcome when they focus on one at a time. So in that case, a consulting company, I'd want to at least make sure that they were clear the company that they're working with, the client that they're working with, what that client's desired business outcome is, so that they make sure when they're setting product outcomes for that team, it's clear, are we on the revenue side or are we on the cost reduction, cost avoidance side?
I look at this a little bit differently again. Here's the thing. If I work at a consulting firm, my company's business outcome is related to my company, not my client's company. So what this one sounds like to me is like if I'm the consultant and you're my client, you might be focused on reducing costs, but I'm focused on increasing the revenue I get from you, right? So in this one, they wrote something like, we are a software consulting company, so we all have internal service offerings, which I'm assuming generates revenue, as well as contributing to both revenue generation and cost reduction for our clients, right? So I think we see this a lot where people confuse customer outcomes with business outcomes. Obviously, both matter, but there's this distinction between, in consulting, we're almost always focused on increasing revenue. We might have some teams looking at building systems to reduce costs, but if you're working directly with the client, you're probably generating revenue, right? You're probably tracking hours because that's what generates revenue. And then there's this second order layer of what's your client's goal, but that's probably not your team's outcome. The benefit to your client is you might help them reach that goal.
Yeah, I think this is, the distinction I think is, and it's not clear from the way they answered the question. Are they setting goals for their teams based on the consulting company's desired business outcomes? Or is that implied? If we help our customers, our clients achieve their desired business outcomes, that will feed our company's desired business outcome, which is typically revenue growth. So not clear.
Yeah. Fascinating though. Okay, this one has no detail whatsoever, but I'm going to raise it anyway because we see this come up a lot. And I think it can also be both. So we are a platform fulfilling team.
I think about it in two ways. One is they may actually share an outcome with one or more of the teams that they're enabling. If it's truly an ingredient, like I see this with data teams a lot, right? Like they're not just creating data for data's sake for other teams to ingest. It's because it is intended to deliver value to our customers. And so they may share an outcome with a team that they're closely related to. If it's something sort of more broadly like authentication that's covering a lot of teams, then typically I would consider the customers, those other internal product teams, to be the customers whose behavior they're driving. And it's usually around some sort of, adoption, utilization of that authentication service as an example. And that's really cost avoidance, but I'm going to get even more specific. It's opportunity cost avoidance. It's really about, it could be like if the teams don't have to manage all the authentication work themselves, they'll be able to spend more of their team's time on what is probably a revenue driving oriented business outcome and product outcome. And not having to do that work themselves is what increases the probability of those outcomes being reached, while this team is really on opportunity cost avoidance for those teams. So it's not really cost reduction, it's opportunity cost avoidance.
This is an interesting one for me because, again, I could argue both sides, but I think I have a preferred side. So I could say, okay, you're a platform team, you're working on authentication. Every product team is integrating your product into theirs. I could make the argument, like you just said with opportunity cost, we're saving every single one of those product teams time, and therefore we're on the reduced cost side. We need fewer teams, etc. What I don't like about that argument is it's really steeped in the IT model, right? The engineering and product teams are cost centers, and that we're trying to be as efficient as possible with our resources. I think instead I prefer to think about it as, look, we're building products to create value for customers that should generate revenue. And anything we do that helps us get better at that is to generate revenue. So I would include most platform teams on the generate revenue side. I think where maybe I have an exception is let's say you're working on a platform team to support your call center agents. And you're allowing your call center agents to take more calls, right? Because you're building your own call center software. That's solidly on the reduced cost side of your business. And I think I would argue that's harder for you to increase revenue with that platform. But I think if you're building the product that's creating value for your customers, you're probably on the increased revenue side.
Yeah. And that's why I guess I would say that that's where it's more likely that they are contributing up the sharing of the outcomes towards those other teams that they've just enabled. Yeah.
This is a tricky one though, right? Like it sort of exposes that internal mindset of how do we think about our product teams? Is it about efficiency or is it about value creation?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, let's find another one. Oh, this one. See, when I read things like that, I just want to send everybody to like a basic business fundamentals class. So I'm going to read this one and let's just talk through it. Remember, this person was asked, is your product intended to increase revenue or reduce costs? And instead of picking one of those options, they said other. And then they wrote, we aim to reduce churn of our users.
Yes. So you're right. It's unfortunate that they don't have an understanding of how reducing churn relates to the revenue side of their equation. But yeah, typically reducing churn is a desired business outcome. Typically the way I think about that in terms of revenue is we have, the number of customers we have times whatever they pay for our service times however long they stay a customer. And if your leadership is saying we want to reduce churn, the good news is you've got clarity about what they want to do. They want to keep customers longer. The bad news is that is a terrible product outcome for a team because it's usually a lagging indicator and there's usually a bunch of preceding behavior or lack of preceding behavior that occurs or doesn't occur that leads to churn. So in this case, they are being tasked with a business outcome, clearly on the revenue side of the equation. And unfortunately, they've been tasked with a lagging business outcome. And they're going to have to work to
Yeah.
translate that into a product outcome.
What surprises me about this is that reducing churn is directly tied to increasing revenue. So what I struggle with is, how does this person not make that connection? And there's a couple things I can consider. Maybe their users don't pay for the product, right? If I work at Facebook and I'm focusing on reducing churn of consumers, maybe it's hard for them to connect the dots to say, when we lose users, we lose ad revenue, right? But like, I can't think of a product where losing users wouldn't lead to revenue loss. So reducing churn is definitely tied to increased revenue. This is one that really jumped out at me, is we have to help people connect these dots, because what's obvious to us is not obvious to everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's another one that, again, I kind of get it why they struggled, but is very clear to me as well. So this person just wrote value added product. And I'm going to assume they're writing that because their product is free and adds value to a paid product. That's my assumption with that. But if you read that differently, I would love to hear an alternative interpretation.
I actually don't know what to think about that. Like, I don't know if that is, like you said, it's sort of like a freemium that they expect to pay for, or if that means really add value to the product to keep people, or does it mean like it's a value, like a services component to an existing product? Like I don't know. I'm struggling on that one.
Yeah, I think, so it definitely says value added product. So I'm assuming they're building a product. Now, here's the thing. It's either value added because you pay more for it, in which case you're definitely on the increased revenue side. So the reason why I'm assuming it's free is maybe that makes it confusing. Like, we don't generate revenue. Our product is free. We give it away. But lots of companies choose to give away a product because it helps to sell another product, right? So if your product's free and it's a value-added product that's helping you sell another product, you're still on the increased revenue side.
Right. Yep. That's right. You're right. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is it might be part of a bundle, and it's one of the free products in the bundle, or it's some sort of an entry product, but ultimately the company is going to get paid for some other product, even if it's not the product that this particular team works on.
Yeah, we see this a lot, right? Where companies build like the free entry product that gets you in their ecosystem, and then you buy the add-ons. I think this is a really important strategy for a lot of companies. Yeah, this was one where I was like, oh, I want to I wish I knew who these companies were, so I could just be like, spend a little bit of time with your product teams and walk them through how the pieces fit together. They really will build better versions of your product if you just do that. Okay, let's do a couple more. Here's one that I think comes up quite a bit that's a tough one. Reduce security risk.
Okay, so this to me is, because I've seen this come up as well. Sometimes people phrase it as like protect the brand, something like that. Or so if you think about like what would happen if we had some sort of catastrophic security event, typically what that would mean would be less customers, right? Customers would leave, or it would be difficult for you to acquire new customers. They wouldn't trust you as much. And so when I see like if the problem they're aiming to solve, and maybe that's the security team, like it absolutely could be like the number one thing that they're looking to solve, it is absolutely on the revenue side of the equation as it relates to customers. I'll give you one other example. It could also be on cost avoidance, because if that might lead to some sort of, triggering some, regulation or a lawsuit or something else that could cause the company to have a lot of expense, it might be also a way to, mitigate that risk of a huge unforeseen expense dealing with the sort of, fallout of a big security risk. But I would say more often than not, this is about acquiring customers and keeping customers because we keep their data safe, our products are safe to use, etc.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one. Let's look at some real companies. So LastPass recently just had a major security breach, right? They're a password protection software, so that's kind of a big deal. If you're working on the security team at LastPass and you are not securing, reducing security risk, you are directly causing your company to lose revenue, right? An event like that directly leads to revenue loss. So I think that type of team where you're saying, look, we can't offer our product without security is on the increased revenue side. I think what's interesting is you brought up sort of this like cost avoidance on the fine side. So like what if there's a regulation like GDPR and we don't comply? Now it's going to cost us money. But I think even that one's a little gray. Let's say we're a US-based company. So let's say MailChimp. We're a US-based company. Maybe all of our customers are in the US. I don't think that's true of MailChimp, but let's just say that. Do we have to care about GDPR? Well, we don't. We're not going to be fined by the EU because we're a US-based company with US-based customers. But our customers have subscribers in the EU, which means our customers are not going to use our product unless we're compliant. I would still put that on the increased revenue side. Now, once we have EU customers, right? But once we have EU customers, now we're either going to get fined, in which case there's a little bit of cost avoidance, but honestly, more likely we're going to lose customers. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely right. It seems like it's most likely on the revenue side, other than if you feel like it's imminent that you're going to get fined.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that like what's in the back of my head right now is why does this matter? Like, why can't we just say the security team does both? They increase revenue by supporting things that our customers want, and they reduce fees. I think the challenge there is what are we building for primarily, right? Are we just building to meet the letter of the law and avoid the fee? Or are we building to satisfy our customers? And the difference between the two is incredible, right? So I think that's where like, yeah, you might get a little benefit over here, but it's important to know that over here is your primary outcome.
Well, and I think this is also where it is critically important for the team to have context from their leadership, because I personally have worked at a company where the legal team had a lot of influence over what was literally every possible risk. The legal team wanted to make sure that that risk was mitigated. And it had very little to do with growing the company. It was really on the risk mitigation side. And that can swamp your entire backlog if your company isn't clear about its tolerance for those level of risks and whether it prefers to mitigate risks or cost avoidance, or whether it prefers to focus on growing revenue.
Yeah, we see this a lot in regulated industries in particular, right? They tend to have bigger compliance teams, legal teams, security teams that check off on literally every single thing. And there's good reason for that. There are fines involved, but it really can put a burden on getting anything out the door. Okay, let's see if we have a couple more we can do here. Okay, here's a really fascinating one, because this one, when I first read it, I was like, oh, it's definitely on one side. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, it could be on either side. So they wrote, It replaces a risky and inefficient paper process.
It replaces a risky and inefficient paper process. For whom? I guess that's a question. Is it for our customers? Is it for our internal users? It doesn't say.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you could, if it was like an internal, I don't know, people are calling in their credit card numbers and our support team are writing them down on paper and then typing them into a database or I don't know what, that to me could be cost avoidance, security risk avoidance, right? We could have some problems with that. But if it's a paper process that currently is happening outside of your digital product experience that your customers are doing, it almost to me sounds like it's an opportunity that the team is choosing to solve. And again, the way that we're going to measure success from a business standpoint is more customers choosing to use our product, our digital product experience, instead of that risky paper process, feels like it's either increasing retention of our existing customers if it's something they do with our current product, or it's acquiring new customers because we have a better solution in our product.
Yeah, I think that you're helping me uncover maybe a guiding principle here, which is if your product is creating a benefit for a customer, you are on the increased revenue side, regardless of whether that customer pays for it. Right? So if this process that we're replacing is a customer process, it is generating revenue for you, or it is intended to generate revenue for you eventually. If it's internally and it's for employees, it probably depends on the purpose of those employees. Are those employees increasing revenue? In which case you're on the increased revenue side. Or are those employees focused on cost reduction? In which case it's the cost, right? So maybe that's a good way to generalize when you're thinking about how your team is having an impact on your business outcomes. Who are you serving? Customers or internal? And then if it's internal, who are those internal folks serving? If it's customers, you're still on that increased revenue side. And then if it's internal, still you might be on the cost reduction side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one thing I want to highlight as before we wrap this up. I'm not making fun of anybody who wrote in these answers. I actually don't think this is the fault of the individual people who took the survey. I think what we're trying to highlight here is that business leaders need to do a much better job of setting the strategic context and helping each team understand how the work that they're doing is creating value for the business. So please keep that in mind. We are not trying to make fun of anybody who wrote any of these things. We're just trying to expose this need and inspire our leaders to help close the gap. All right. Thank you, Hope.